You're listening to Second Cut. This is the weekly podcast, no longer from the filmmagazine.com, where we talk about topics in film theory, criticism, history, and Sam makes a sad face when I say we're no longer from the film magazine. I'm Jacob, and I'm the one who wants that sweet saddlebag that the male protagonist of the Nosferatu movies is always carrying.
I'm Sam, and I'm the one who watched 4 versions of Nosferatu, not just 3 for this.
I'm Kieran. I'm the one that is trying to make sure we don't get hit by a copyright strike.
Well, okay, now that I have lied in the description, what's the 4th one? I didn't know there was a 4th Nosferatu.
No, I went extracurricular for that, yeah. Only last year there was a crowdfunded dirt cheap version with Doug Jones, and it's terrible.
Is Doug Jones any good?
He is the saving grace, as he often is in a lot of the schlock he's in. He's a very good Orlok, but yeah, it's mostly just back projections from the silent film, and then like just amateur hour kind of qualities of acting. Yeah, it's not good at all.
Is Doug Jones
otherwise known as beautiful?
Is Doug Jones in the Nick Cage school of I'll do anything for a paycheck, or like did he believe in the project?
I think he's the go-to guy for we need someone thin to build a big makeup effects on top of. And
we need a thin monster. Is Del Toro not using him at the moment?
Yeah, and because he's played so many monsters over the years, it's just he just needs to turn up. You know, he doesn't really need to do the extra prep. It's an easy win for him.
Admittedly, he's normally kind of got the same amount of commitment to Del Toro as horses do to Peter Jackson, so that Bruce Campbell can't use them, but that's another story for another time. Please tell me you saw that.
No.
Bruce Campbell going off on a semi-cartoonish rant that he's never seen a second of Lord of the Rings, because when he was in New Zealand filming, I'm not sure if it's a show or an episode or something, or a small film or whatever, he needed one horse, and every single horse they could find was not available because Peter Jackson was using them all. Was he filming
Rise of the Rohirrim at the time?
I think it was just all of Lord of the Rings. He was just like, I need one horse. No, Peter Jackson has thousands. I refuse to watch Lord of the Rings. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh, gosh. All right. Yeah, there's 3 major studio Nosferatu films. Very interesting histories and approaches to all of them. And Kieran, you're a resident vampire scholar, literally.
Apparently now. It's ridiculous.
So, yeah, I mean, we're obviously going to go chronologically here. But what's so cool about Nosferatu is it now spans over 100 years of cinema history. Like, it's so cool just having that preserved and continuing to be made and revered. And yeah, I'm glad there's a now modern film that people will watch because it's in color and isn't all old looking and
has some big names,
boring. Yeah, it has big
4 Oscar noms. 5.
It has Renfield and Knock.
Yeah,
yes,
like,
it does.
It is kind of the combination of Nosferatu and Dracula. Like, let's get as near to the middle ground as we physically possibly can. It's quite funny.
That and Herzog's, but it in their own ways, I guess. But
Herzog is just like re-putting back the names when the original was, and then goes off in his own direction. Of just, let's have everything about minus 5 miles an hour.
Yeah, we'll come to all that, I think.
Yes, but you two are the resident horror old school people. So tell us about Dracula. Tell us about why Nosferatu exists and not a 1922 Dracula film, etc.
I mean,
Sam,
try and jump in when you can.
Yeah, no, Sam, jump in first.
All I was going to say, it basically exists because they wanted. This German film company wants to do a version of Dracula, and Stoker, who died by then, his estate was owned by his wife, and they went ahead without securing the intellectual property rights, basically.
Was he buried in dirt from his home land?
Or island. Yeah, I mean, really, I think it's a slight misnomer that they changed the names to avoid the copyright. I think it's more like as I said, a commentary with the original film, basically saying that was the main change was more to do with the fact that we're setting this film in Germany and we're going to make the name sound a bit more Germanic.
Yeah.
They somewhat naively thought that they wouldn't, the estate owners wouldn't be that bothered if they just went ahead and made the film without getting prior authorization, but obviously they, Miss Stoker was litigious. So
Yeah, I mean, it was a kind of a thing of we're going to change these anyway, but it's probably good practice so we don't get sued
yeah,
anyway, because
yeah.
there's no evidence that they even thought to check if
Mm.
there was any like copy. Well,
Do you
they
think
must
the
have kind of
Germans have
known.
like a word for that where you're trying to not get sued, so you do a small thing to?
Yeah, but it's about 16 syllables long and still one word. No, it's like it's a weird one. There we go. Get the catchphrase in. Although the name change, as I find interesting, I didn't realize this as part of my general Dracula study. It's almost like I've got to write a paper on Dracula for a Dracula conference in a couple of months' time. And so I used the excuse to do quite a bit of Dracula research and just general vampires. There was a version of Dracula, a Swedish version translation, which is kind of not a translation because they changed quite a few of the plot lines and bits and pieces and names and added characters and took some away. So, for example, the Three Brides of Dracula becomes like a singular kind of entity there and stuff like that. This is the one that if you hang around the internet enough, people occasionally go, "Did you know that there was an Icelandic version of Dracula that nobody knew about until like 10 years ago," kind of thing? It's completely different. We think it's kind of a translation of the Swedish version. From the stuff that I've read, there may have been some input from Stoker. There may not. Kind of sort of Stoker, I think, knew about it at the very least, even if he didn't kind of do everything. So may have suggested some changes because there's stuff going back to short stories and things that weren't put in. But the interesting thing is that in that version, Jonathan Harker is called Thomas, who is obviously what Thomas is called in the Murnau version and then into the Eggers version. So I do wonder, with Swedish being a more kind of mainland European language, if there's some kind of filtering down through there in some way to get to the Murnau version.
Yeah, it definitely sounds plausible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'd go with that.
Well, but then it begs the question: why didn't they just steal that version without authorization?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Murnau version, there's a lot of stuff that you're just like, what even is the point of this? I don't know. It's almost like they kind of were running drafts and kind of just had to run with stuff because they were running out of money. I mean, they didn't have any money anyway, so that's kind of the point, which is why they shot a lot of it on location. But
yeah, it was made fairly cheaply and kind of in a hurry, wasn't it? Essentially, and of course, Stoker's widow, ordered, all surviving prints, to be destroyed, and thankfully, some got out of Germany and were smuggled out of Germany, or they'd already been passed on, or they'd got to other markets beforehand. So, and because we could have very easily lost, one of the great kind of defining kind of early horror films.
yeah, and I mean, as other people have said in kind of the actual academic stuff, it's never like it was kind of disappeared for ages. It's just that essentially they finally said yes, okay. Germany went, yeah, okay, fair enough. It's a breach of copyright after they battled for about 3 years. We'll go through and destroy the copies, but they were under no obligation to provide any proof that the copies have been destroyed. So suddenly there's some with slightly translated versions appearing in England in like 1927 kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you try and get those done, and then it suddenly appears in the US, with slightly different subtitles. So it's just kind of like a whack-a-mole version,
Yeah, and apparently Miss Stoker's kind of lawyers had already kind of told her, it's like, yeah, we can probably kind of order them to do this in Germany, which is where the film's from, where it's produced. We can go after that company and kind of force them to abide by our demands to an extent. They said basically the prince are already out of the country. Yeah, we're not going to find them. We're not going to be able to track them all down. And if the rights have been sold on to other studios around the world as well. So they basically said, it's not going to happen, basically. So we can only do so much, essentially.
Yeah, it's quite funny, all that kind of thing. Interestingly enough, I mean, I spent a sort of day and a half, 2 days going back through all kind of the literary branches and branchings off to eventually get to Dracula, and they are numerous and many, and I've been through quite a few of them and have quite a few stacked up beside me in various books and tomes and online and things like that. One of the interesting ones is that going back to Germany, because obviously the first two versions are German versions, there's a long kind of line of kind of this influence that, influence that, influence that, influence that, going back to a German ballad by Gottfried August Bürger, whose name I've now butchered. And the poem is called Lenore, sometimes Lenora or Eleanor, various kind of things. And essentially, he was kind of inspired by lots of other people. And this is in 1773, and wanted, because obviously Germany had fractured, had been rebuilt as Ottoman Empire and all those kinds of things. He wanted to essentially try and create some ballads that were part of a kind of almost German folk tradition and start to build that up, a kind of cultural identity. And he came up with this this ballad, Lenore, that was been variously translated. The translation I read was originally from sort of 1844 or something like that. A big ballad poem, and it essentially revolves around a young woman, Lenore, or Eleanor, who's waiting for her husband to come back from the war. Doesn't arrive, and then one night he does on this horseback. Takes her away to the marriage bed, apparently, which is going to be very thin and made of wood. Flies all the way over, riding through the woodlands and things like that. And she asks, "Why do you ride so fast?" And the argument is that the line is something along the lines of the dead ride swiftly, or the dead ride fast. I will come back to this. It does link into Dracula at that point specifically. Eventually get to this kind of graveyard where it's like, oh, he's dead. Essentially, one of the guys is actually Death, and she gets transported down to hell for some reason. I don't quite know that, but there's a kind of, I don't know, love can't hold death, something like that. This is fairly influential, and the translation was. It influenced a Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem called Christabel. Originally, it was going to be published in Lyrical Ballads along with Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. That didn't quite happen. He managed to, it was meant to be in 5 parts. He wrote 2 before he died, and the 2 parts were published in 1816. We know that apparently Byron commended him on this, and Byron was with Polidori and the Shelleys when we got Frankenstein, and Polidori and Byron kind of came together to write The Vampire, which is the first kind of vampire story in English thing, which is, I think, the first usage of the word, if not the first popular usage. And we get lots of stuff from there. It gets,
outside of the rural Caucasus.
yeah, in terms of kind of a literary fictional tradition, there are more splittings. The poem Christabel, there are weird things because it essentially is about a young woman who meets another young woman out in the moonlight who is strange. I think she's called Gertrude or something along those lines. I'll double check. I have read it and just forgotten. And then there's weird things like coming back inside. This strange person has to be lifted over the threshold, which was a sign of witchcraft. And she kind of pretends to feel weak and gets carried over. And by the time she's on the other side, she's okay again. There's a mastiff outside, a guard dog who whines in her presence even though she's asleep. Weird stuff like that in Moonlight. In the second part, the Christabel's father seems to start to become infatuated with her, and Christabel's like, there's something wrong with this woman, we need to get rid of her, but the father's infatuated. Anybody who knows anything about vampire may see some connections here with Carmilla, which is the lesbian vampire story, which then, as many other things, got made into a trilogy of Hammer films, kind of trying to steal into the fact that when they were making them, the nudity stuff was coming down. You're allowed to do that, so they're like, yes, let's get some breasts out on and some blood as well, which is essentially the reason for the lesbian vampire trilogy.
Sorry, it's hilarious happens with Hammer. As soon as you tick off the 70s, tits.
Yeah, that's literally just because the census came down. They're like, right, we need to get more people in. Carmilla is obviously a influence on Dracula. Various bits in it, but specifically, there is an idea that there is a deleted first chapter that Dracula wrote in the manuscripts. Okay, and this eventually, he wrote it, and then you go back through the archives and the old versions, it's kind of crossed out and doesn't appear in the final manuscript. This gets changed into a short story called Dracula's Guest, which comes around in 1940, 1910, something along those lines. And in it, there's a character whose name has now been changed. It's not Jonathan Harker. Probably is a Jonathan Harker substitute now. Is traveling through an expanse of tracked in a foreign country, traveling from place to place. There are weird howlings in the desert. He wants to go down into a valley and investigate somewhere, and the coachman says, no, there are weird spirits down there. And he goes down, and this is an interesting point. It is specifically mentioned that he kind of turns back and sees a coach kind of go past and scare his other coachman at the top of this road where he once was. And where he turns around and looks is specifically mentioned as a crossroads. I mentioned that because in the Eggers version, Orlok picks Jonathan up specifically at a crossroads. It is not a crossroads in the book or anything like that. I think this is where the specific thing has come from. In my review of it, I said it might have been for the fact that there is a crossroads in Murnau's film Faust. There's also crossroads mentioned in Varney the Vampire, which I'll come back to later because it's hilarious. But I also think that this Dracula's Guest thing, specifically a crossroads, is where that might have come from. Very quickly to finish on this, in the rest of Dracula's Guest, he finds that he doesn't believe, I don't believe in all these superstitions, goes round this kind of sort of haunted village. There's rain, he comes inside from the rain, and then realize, there's weird stuff going on, and there may be a female vampire that comes out from here from like a mausoleum. As far as we can work out, this was probably meant to be like somebody that then, like one of Dracula's brides kind of thing. There's only one of them, hence they think it might be kind of the version that becomes in the Swedish version, because there's just a singular character. But on the mausoleum slab, whatever you want to call it, is all these things. Here lies Countess something, which is obviously a harking back to the Karnsteins from Carmilla. But on the inscription is roughly the lines of "the dead travel fast," which is what they were saying in the Berger poem from like 120 years earlier. So you have all these links kicking in, and in Dracula there's even links with Oscar Wilde, because amongst many things, Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker, I didn't know this, were neighbours in Dublin and fought over the same woman, aka Oscar Wilde proposed to Florence. She turned him down and got married to Stoker, and then would eventually fight the Nosferatu thing. But there are similarities to the fact that 2 years before Dracula came out, Oscar Wilde was done for gross indecency, I believe the thing is, with another male and sentenced to 2 years hard labor. And there's comparisons, I've seen essays between Dracula and one of his plays, Salome.
So, Kieran, in that instance, is Oscar Wilde or is
which
Stoker?
One's Dracula?
Yeah, which one's Dracula and which one's Harker Hutter?
I think probably it will depend on who's writing the essay at the time. It's just there's definitely, I think if nothing else, there was definitely a homosexuality on the mind, because somebody he was neighbours with and knew quite well, Irving. Henry Irving, isn't it, who ran the theatre, the Lyceum Theatre that Stoker worked on. As far as I can work out, I think might have put on one or two Wilde plays. So, there was definitely a knowledge of that going on at the time, and therefore similarities may have come across to the kind of homosexual themes that are coming on. And then there's weird things like Keats' poems. You have vague vampiric kind of feelings in poems like Lamia, which is fairly well known, so much that they study it at A-level. Guess who's had to very quickly learn it and teach it for A-level? There's one, La Dame sans la Merci, La Belle Dame sans Merci, where a man gets enraptured by a woman and falls asleep and dreams that essentially a load of people in hell are going, essentially, don't go near her, she's evil. And Lamia has stuff like that. And throughout kind of the 1700s, 1800s, essentially a lot of vampires were female, and that was kind of the thing. It wasn't unknown to have male vampires, but it wasn't as common, if that makes sense. Almost like a kind of 65-35 split.
Well, do you know what caused the change? Obviously Dracula's popularity is probably a big factor, but is there some cultural or societal reason for that shift.
I'm probably going to say that. I mean, even I can't remember one of the books. I'll look it up at some point. Was going into kind of what was happening around before Dracula gets written, is sort of the advent of modern vampires and stuff like that. And even like 10 years before, there's big scientific articles being written saying vampires don't exist and stuff. It was still very much a scientific exercise at the time. As to why it becomes to male, pretty much purely to start with, and kind of the default, I would say it's Dracula's fault. Pretty much. And this is kind of part of my argument, or what my paper is going to be about, is that kind of before Dracula there were vampires, but they're all kind of floating around, and even things that weren't vampires had vampiric tendencies and things like that. So Lamia the Keats poem is not a vampire, you know, all these various things. Rider Haggard's novel She, there's a character who's kind of there's very Rider Haggard, for those who don't know, wrote kind of the imperialist adventure stories. So the Brits going to some lost world and finding right things. So King Solomon's Mine is the main example, and then would be influenced on people like Arthur Conan Doyle, who did The Lost World, which is where you get half of King Kong from, essentially. And in She, there's some adventurers that go to track down there's like a bit of pottery and some artifacts that have been passed down generation. This one character, and they go into Africa to try and track down the origins, and they find this kind of, they go through long tracks of kind of desolate jungle where there's animal attacks and there's savage peoples who worship a being that possibly has supernatural powers, and they go and find it's essentially somebody from like 2,000 years ago. Who was in love with somebody that gets mentioned in Herodotus, essentially. And she's got strange powers of death, and she can live immortally and stuff like that. So there's stuff in there. She's not a vampire, but there are obvious parallels with Dracula, considering it was 10 years apart.
Slight tangent. She is not one of the better Hammer films from the late 50s.
I haven't seen the film. I literally just power read the book in about 24 hours.
Christopher Lee in brownface, and that's the one for you.
Ooh, yeah.
And Peter Cushing is a very patronising colonialist, essentially.
Yeah, Rider Haggard stories are fun. You do have to take them with a large pinch of salt, considering they are essentially imperialist adventures. Aren't the Brits amazing and everybody else is a savage story?
Well, I think it's like if you read the original James Bond in Fleming books now, you've got to read through that prism. You know, you can't read them in a kind of isolation. You've got to just almost put yourself back at that time, you know, or else it just doesn't work at all.
But yeah, going back to your question, Jacob, all these kind of things that are around, you've got vampire-like things, and it's still very much in the realm of superstition. Dracula comes along, and then thanks to Dracula and its adaptations, because its adaptations are really what hammer it down, and drive the stake in, if you like. And by the way, Nosferatu is not the first adaptation of Dracula. There was one the year before, a Austro-Hungarian version, depending on.
There's also apparently a not surviving Russian version that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, and these are all lost and that kind of thing. But thanks to Nosferatu, thanks to the stage play, which started in 1924 in Derby, hilariously enough, which was not its first stage adaptation. Stoker essentially was convinced to cut down his novel into a 4-hour dramatic reading, essentially, with other people. And apparently it was absolutely terrible, and Henry Irving hated it and essentially went, never do it again. So the stage plays is actually the second stage adaptation of Dracula. But thanks to that, and then you get Bela Lugosi involved when it's a hit and it tours round, and then you get the Universal versions and everything after that, and it becomes kind of a joke. And kind of half of my paper is going, okay, writing a vampire story was great when kind of they're all myths or whatever, and nobody concretized the idea of vampire. Now you ask an awful lot of people vampire, you're going to think of Dracula before you kind of realize there's any alternative. You know, it's just kind of the default. Dracula and vampire are kind of simultaneous in people's heads of connotation. Bit like detective. You give 100 people detective, and in their heads, in about 10 seconds, either a magnifying glass, a deer stalker, or a pipe will have appeared. Sherlock Holmes is detective. They are the same thing. And I think that's kind of one of the issues that is had, that kind of now you kind of have what I'm kind of terming the Dracula problem every time you write a vampire, because you go, there's a bat, and we know it's a horror story. They've immediately go, okay, right, it's a vampire. They've got this, and this. And whatever you do, everyone's immediately comparing it to Dracula.
Well, and
subconsciously.
We'll get onto the film eventually, but like Twilight, everybody goes, vampires don't sparkle. Vampires aren't blah, blah, blah. Well, vampires are always being like, what's the word? Innovated. There's always something changing. We'll get onto that with this film as well. And it makes me wonder, like, were people in the 1950s going, oh, no, that's not what a vampire isn't blah, blah. They're writing to their fanzine.
How dare a vampire have a mustache? We will get to that bit. That's a funny debate. So that is a 20-minute history of Dracula and going into things, and various other points I'm sure will come up.
Long story short, vampires in the Anglosphere developed in 19th century fiction.
Kind of. Although Dracula is a weird one, and we'll come to it with Murnau, which I guess we should probably do, which is that actually there's quite still a lot of the epistolary stuff still in Murnau in various guises of giving the information, because that was a fundamental part of Dracula, and in fact my entire paper is technically about like epistolary vampires, and the fact that the whole point of Dracula.
What are epistolary vampires?
So, well, epistolary is a form of fiction where you do essentially, it's kind of like written found footage. So you use manuscripts and newspaper articles and reports and diary entries and that kind of thing in order to assemble. It's not told by a narrative.
Both Dracula and Frankenstein use that format.
What's old is new. Found footage is just, we've had it.
Although there's a lot of people that say specifically that Stoker was actually drawing upon Wilkie Collins, specifically with The Woman in White and The Moonstone, where his two famous ones, which kind of started detective fiction, and they were known as the sensationalist novels. They were essentially kind of the novel blockbusters of the time, and started that off if you can make it. The whole point was like, let's put everything gothic, everything mysterious, let's throw everything in and write it big and impressive and mad. And especially The Moonstone, it's essentially after the case, and this is more of a detective fiction. The kind of policeman is going around all the people, asking them to write down their version of events and put them all together. But the whole thing about Dracula is that if you've got a thing where 10 years ago, still in the scientific columns, they've essentially said that your mysterious force doesn't exist, you've kind of got an uphill battle to do to try and make it convincing and scary that this thing actually is a force of nature. So by putting it in the epistolary fashion, and let's be honest, most of the people writing are kind of serious scholars. There's doctors, there's lawyers and print media and the news that they wouldn't lie, right? And logs from even the kind of captain of the ship in the Demeter thing. It's all then typewritten up by Mina Harker. On a typewriter, which is a newfangled, it's only been around 30, 40 years, a newfangled device. Seward is talking into a version of a dictaphone or something like that to record everything. Everything's very scientific and up to date, and this is how kind of Stoker gives the validity to all these things. They're so modern and up to date and of the time and scientific and all the people reporting these facts are very intelligent and highly respected, and they all say there's a vampire, regardless of the fact that near the end, like there's a line in there going, we don't even have a scrap of evidence to prove that there's a vampire exists. That's not the point, because the audience has already made up in their mind that if this doesn't prove it exists, nothing does. And all this kind of epistolary fashion does carry over into Murnau in various ways. Not as strong, obviously. The nearest you get now is what is now called found footage, and actually there's a documentary on Shudder, or there was a year ago when I watched it, called The Found Footage Phenomena, which kind of says that Dracula is the first found footage horror story. Arguable, but I can see where they're going. in terms of the first. So that carries over into Murnau, and then you get all the raft of changes.
Raft.
Yeah, because he floats down on a raft.
Yeah. Okay, so we got all that. Who's doing the Murnau one? I've already forgotten. Okay, Kieran,
everyone else do it because I need to recover.
Well, I'll introduce it for you so you can have a sip of your tea or whatever. Yeah,
shut up for 5 minutes.
I always confuse Murnau with Carl Dreyer because I'm dumb. He did Vampire, very different movie.
Yeah. Okay. I mean that's where the confusion comes from.
They're both very white. That's what I remember about them. You can go watch Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror or whatever, on YouTube. Like there's versions. You can watch a dumb colorized version on Amazon. This is pretty
public domain, so
yeah, it's pretty widely available. So I mean, I'd encourage going to watch it because it's from one of the greats of 1920s, especially Weimar German of expressionist filmmaking.
Won Best Director, first Oscars.
There you
Or
go.
one of them. It was like special achievement, something along those lines. He won it for Sunrise and something else.
Yes.
Sunrise won one of the first Oscars, but I can't remember.
Which I watched, funny enough, last weekend for the first time. Sunrise, yeah. So still technically a silent film, but it's one of those weird in between silent films where they've actually put kind of sounds to go on the soundtrack. You know, so there's no audible dialogue, but there's a pre-written score to go with it and pre-written points where you put the sound effects in, so it's sort of halfway house.
It's an interesting one where they're experimenting with techniques and stuff.
Yeah, it got a few awards. I think it might have got Best Actress as well for that.
I can't remember her name, but it did get that as well. So very important director in that regard.
Yeah, and Murnau was like many German directors. Like I don't think he moved because of Nazism, because he moved in the 20s, but he was one of the first in Hollywood.
Yeah, and then people like Karl Freund would follow.
Yeah, and he obviously would have had, I think, a much bigger career had he not died so young. You know, he died in the the early 30s. So I think after doing, I think he did 3 or 4 films in Hollywood, and then
4, I think, including Sunrise. Although it took me until about 3 hours ago, maybe 2, to realize his last name wasn't actually Murnau. It was Plump.
Yeah.
Friedrich Wilhelm Plump. And he changed his name to Murnau because that was the name of a small town near Lake Staffel, where he lived for a while.
Apparently,
and also because his actual name is a bit embarrassing.
Yes.
Apparently, he moved to the U.S. because of the popularity of The Last Laugh, so it was entirely commercial.
I think essentially he'd done a couple of things like Faust as well, which I will bring up once or twice. And then he was doing The Last Laugh, and essentially kind of as they were editing that, Hollywood had already asked, can you make us a film? So they were still kind of finishing off that as he was now in Hollywood starting Sunrise and setting that up.
Yes. So, Kieran, now that you've had a break, tell us all about the largest early cinema adaptation of vampires that ripped off the largest literary version.
Yeah, it is a rip-off of Dracula. What more do you need? The basics are still there in that you get somebody who's a kind of a new solicitor with a partner, a wife. I can't remember if they're married in this one or not. That gets told the Count Orlok, not Dracula, Orlok, because we need to change the name, is looking for a house in England. He lives, not in England, looking for a house near us. This is where I'm confusing everything.
Yeah.
Like, in Dracula, it's a house in England. All these movies are set purely in Germany or the Germanic territories.
Vampires really require like real estate law to exist in order to have some of their rules function.
Yeah, there's a lot about them. Although I did read somewhere that I think it might have been in the book Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix, who essentially said that all ghost stories are essentially around property disputes.
Do communist vampires need to be invited in, or it's communal property? It's all good.
I don't know, but I have wondered what happens if a vampire gets turned or born in international waters.
Or what if their property is taken by eminent domain? Like, are they no longer allowed?
What happens if they were born in a country which no longer exists? What happens if they're born on the International Space Station? Don't worry, I feel.
Oh my god! Oh my god! What if Tom Hanks in The Terminal was a vampire?
Oh, what if what if it's a birthright citizen in the United States right now?
Oh.
I was going to say, yeah. There are lots of issues. Yeah, very closely related to werewolves as well. So Thomas Hutter in this one, Jonathan Harker, I'm going to use the same names. Jonathan Harker goes and travels through the mountains, gets picked up by somebody.
Oh, we should also note it's the house across from his. So,
oh yeah,
his devious boss who's reading a paper with like evil symbols on it and wringing his hands goes, yes, he's going to move in right across the street.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got to play it up, and the occult thing is another interesting trend because the occult stuff pretty much isn't in the book as well. This is a Murnau thing which goes on throughout the various Nosferatu versions. So yeah, we go to Castle Dracula, Castle Orlok, whatever you want to call it. Jonathan Harker gets detained by Count Orlok, Dracula, whatever you want to call him.
Count Drawlock.
Yeah. Orlocula, the vampire, in his castle, and he's very kind of ratty in this version, completely different to Stoker's depiction, which I'm sure I'll read out at some point. And Mina Harker, it is Mina in this one, who's now Ellen. Mina Harker, I don't care, senses that something's coming.
The wife.
Yes, the wife senses something is coming in some way. Dracula packs up his boxes in weird kind of cutting, kind of stop motion style. It's 1922, give him a break. They haven't invented properly kind of fluid camera movements yet. So.
I would argue that no version of Nosferatu does this look convincing, with the vampire moving his boxes of dirt.
On his own, yes.
It's an inherently stupid sight.
It's very silly.
Yes. He has all these things. This is like why if you had the Brides of Dracula in it, which aren't in any of the Nosferatu versions, he'd at least try and get them to do it for him. He has servants in some versions.
To do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, like you would. But yeah, he goes down the stream and arrives in, takes a ship, which is the Demeter scene.
He takes a raft to the ship.
Yep, and then goes on the ship. Ignore the geography of all this; it doesn't make sense.
We don't know what sea he's going across to get to Germany.
But you need to have a sea in order to have the kind of the Demeter stuff.
The only way it works is that the town of Wisder or whatever it is, it's at the
Wisborg, isn't it?
Yes, it's in the north of Germany. He sails through the Black Sea, through the Strait in Turkey, around the Iberian Peninsula, passes the UK, and then goes to Germany. And that is the outline of the journey in Herzog's. They actually kind of read out of the ship log, but they do also mention we are now out of the Caspian Sea, which is a landlocked lake. So,
yes.
Also on the wrong side of the Black Sea from Transylvania.
Yeah. Now, hilariously enough, in the book there are very detailed accounts of these going this way and this way, this way, and tracking. This has no vampire hunting at all. Again, it's kind of cobbled together pastiche. It's more on the atmosphere than the actual logistics. Okay, give him some credit. Dracula arrives back in Wisborg or whatever the name is, London, Whitby, whatever you want to call it, England, Germany. And moves all the boxes himself again into his house. Meanwhile, the estate agent Knock is now gone insane and has become Renfield, because we need to have a Renfield character going. The blood is the life, obviously.
One thing I always, sorry, just to interrupt briefly. One thing always really bothers me about these adaptations. It kind of works in German, but whenever you have it dubbed into English, or you just have an English version, they pronounce it as Canuck, which I don't understand at all.
I do
But
not either.
I don't know if that's necessarily wrong, because I don't know how it's actually pronounced in with a German accent. That may be correct in German, but we read it as knock, the English word, and pronounce it as knock. So anyway.
Yeah, weird stuff. Yeah, Jonathan Harker manages to escape somehow. Falls off a cliff and somehow survives. It's very kind of. We're not going to explain the exact specifics in the book. He tries to scale down the side of the castle, which I don't think is put into any adaptation for ages. It was tried in one of the play versions. It was meant to have a lot. That's where we get the long black cape from. In one of these stage adaptations, and there was very specifically to have it triangles crawling down a wall, and it has to be stiff to look like bat wings. Specifically,
which is one of my favourite images from the book that they hardly ever get right if they use it at all. It's
I don't think Christopher Lee does it, but Langella does it in the 77.
And Claes Bang did in the BBC TV version.
Yeah, once they've got the tech available to do it, we'll do it. But in the early versions, that isn't a thing. So Jonathan Harker manages to get back. There is something going on here. Meanwhile, there is a professor, a Van Helsing-like character that does pretty much nothing. I don't know why he's in it. He's just kind of there. Mina kind of reads from the book that Jonathan has managed to find about Nosferatus when he was traveling to there, and she realizes that it's a Nosferatu Orlok which is come here, only pretty much, well, kind of almost because he sees a picture of her in a locket and is like, I want her, yum yum yum. Goes and tries to drink her blood, and she sacrifices herself so that he stays there until the sunlight comes up, and he disappears into a puff of smoke. The end. So there are things
Kieran,
that are
what's special about that part right there that you just mentioned?
What, the sunlight part?
Yes.
Oh, that's where we get vampires and sunlight from. Well, specifically dying. The book, he's weakened at times during the day.
Yeah. He can go out during the day. Just prefers not to. Prefers to recuperate during the day and just kind of rest. Essentially. Yeah. I mean, I love how like films they do kind of when there's not the actual mythology, to for our story, we'll just invent stuff. So invent the kind of vampire dying sunlight because it's more visually interesting kind of ending for your story. Like in the Wolfman, invent the poem about wolf's bane blooms and silver bullets and all that. That was all invented for the film because there's not really much prior werewolf mythology beyond the fact that as a metaphor for mankind's animalistic sides.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like in the book. I'm trying to retrack down one quote from somewhere that somebody was quoting from somebody else in one of my books that I was reading that I now can't find. I'm going to attribute the quote to Nina Arbach, who is a Dracula scholar. Somebody else quoting her that I now can't find where they quoted it, but I'm fairly sure it's her that quoted it, who essentially said, well, in the book, essentially, Dracula is defeated by the high-tech technology of essentially committee meetings and minute taking, because it's everyone getting together and formulating a plan. And a big part of it is Mina, who has very good knowledge of all the train timetables and therefore work out when Dracula's getting out of the country and where to go and follow him. It's quite funny.
I'm basically the boys club just track him down and rush him, don't they? They just kind of...
Eventually, yeah, although they manage to use and this is where the kind of more occult stuff kind of comes from, especially when you get to the new versions. The link between Mina and Nosferatu is that in the book there is no link until Dracula gives Mina what is known as the baptism of blood, which is essentially to make one become a vampire. So he slips himself over.
That's
and
where Coppola stole it from. Yeah,
drinking the blood. And from that she has a kind of almost telepathic link to Dracula. The interesting thing that I picked up is that a couple of people have said in the various kind of sections that I've read recently that essentially, like, also the thing with Dracula is that there is nothing meant to be, by the end of it, supernatural. It might be supranatural, but it's all scientifically explained. There is no kind of occult stuff. There is a reference in Dracula that is it here that apparently Van Helsing reckons that Dracula attended the Scholomance, which was a kind of like a secret order to learn the dark arts. Dracula Stoker may have got this from another text called Transylvanian Superstitions by I think it's Edith Gerard, and we're fairly sure that he would have had access to this, if not like own it. And in this, and I've got the online version on it. It also specifically, we think, where he got Nosferatu from as well, because it's mentioned in here as part of the superstitions. And what was I talking about just before I opened it up? Because I've lost track of my train of thought, which is really not good.
It was a difference between the two, the occult and the science of vampires as explanations, or
I'm sure I did it. I've literally just 100% lost track.
Kieran, let me give you a Nosferatu specific question that doesn't require comparison. In the 22 film, what is Orlok's motivation? Like, why is he seeking in the 22 version specifically? Why is he seeking out whatever the main female protagonist, the wife? Why is he going after her? Why is she the one involved here?
Yeah, good question. I think he was planning to move anyway, but then catches a glimpse of her and decides.
Yeah. I think she's a nice bonus to his plan to get into that house and punt people. He was going to do anyway.
Yeah, because obviously initially there's a lot played up about the homosexuality, and this comes back in the 77, 79. The Herzog version. Yeah, 77 is the Langela Dracula, isn't it? That in the book he specifically says I can love, which is where, and literally as he's fending off the bride's Dracula and picks her up, whereas in the Herzog version he's literally told I want what you and Jonathan have, and she said you will never have that, or something along those lines. So there's a weird kind of bisexuality kind of thing going on there, which is again where they think we got the wild thing from. But also Murnau in this, just going off on another tangent, obviously, because this is me just giving over all my vague bits of research. Murnau knew and was very good friends with somebody called Hans Ehrenbaum Degel, who I've now butchered.
Should have changed his name too.
Yep, he was a German writer who was the son of a wealthy Jewish banker, which is also one of the weird things where they go, oh, this version of Dracula is obviously meant to be Jewish, and there's bits in Dracula that you can see it. That interpretation kicks around in the 70s, but the Murnau version, this kind of relationship, many people have seen as being possibly homosexual, or at least very, very strong.
And is that tying back to the fact that Murnau was gay himself, and people want to kind of make that inference because of that?
And also there's the fact that Hans died during World War One as well.
And
so now
he never quite got over that, did he?
Yeah, so they're going that, perhaps the longing for belonging and things like that is expressed through Orlok trying to move somewhere else and become part of it. And there's also stuff about the Weimar Republic and stuff. Obviously, this is 1922, when politics is in absolute overdrive, insanity. There's stories because of the stuff that Germany had to do to repay all the debts from the war and kind of re-subsidize their economy, just kind of crashed. So there's stories of people wheelbarrowing whole wheelbarrows full of money to buy like a loaf of bread, because it meant absolutely nothing at that point. It's ridiculous.
I mean, it was one shit show after another, wasn't there? You barely survive, a world war. Then you get the Spanish flu, and then you get the economic crash and everything else. And obviously this kind of everyone's looking for someone to blame, so the kind of xenophobia is on the rise, and from here onwards essentially, which again, it's possibly a reason why a lot of people use that reading for this particular version of this story. And it's arguable, I'm not sure whether it's intentional on Murnau's part, but
Yeah.
you can definitely see it there if you
But
want to look for it.
as a lot of people have said, the vampire doesn't just have one meaning. It's an incredibly amorphous metaphor, and you can put pretty much anything you want into it in terms of passing something on to another, in terms of kind of emptiness or hollowness, which comes into the Herzog one of loneliness, be it kind of power and darkness, or a kind of even Faustian kind of overtones, which again, after this one, Murnau would make an adaptation of Goethe's version of Faust, so there's a lot of connection. And actually, I think there's the kind of one of the famous shots from Faust is the giant thing of Mephisto, with this massive bat wings covering the kind of miniature that they've got of the town there. And I think that may be part of the inspiration for, in the Eggers version, the hand that's not only kind of the shadow that is obviously used in the Murnau version, but it covering specifically a village or something like that at the town that they're in. I think that's where that comes from. The shadow covering is another Murnau film.
I thought you were going to say that's the image that was directly lifted for Fantasia.
I wonder where Fantasia got it from. Strange.
Yeah.
And also we have one other major point in Nosferatu that is important, and it's the plague that he brings along with him with the rats. And I mean, that also plays into like potential anti-Semitic interpretations, regarding Jews bringing disease and the association with rats. But like you said, there's a lot of ways to look at vampires, and it could simply be plague gross, bad, vampire bad.
Yeah, that and the fact that again, having to go back to the book, because this is the first kind of adaptation of the book which is on display, kind of, that we've got. There is, as far as I can remember, and I read this about 2 weeks ago, reread it, there is no plague in there. There's passages with lots of rats, and kind of he's the king of the rats and things like that, and kind of rats are a sign of Dracula there, but there is no plague. It's more kind of concerned with having Lucy Westenra and the sexual imagery of Lord Godalming staking her and writhing around in ecstasy and stuff like that. So it's weird that the kind of more, what you might say, obviously anti-Semitic one of the two versions possibly being Dracula rather than Nosferatu, especially because there's parts with money kind of streaming out of Dracula's kind of coat pockets and things like that in various attacks. The rare times he turns up in the book, because he's in it for the first 50 pages and then appears like twice in the rest. It's ridiculous. He's not there. There's more Moby Dick in Moby Dick than Dracula in Dracula. It's just stupidity. But when you've got something like that, which is more of a kind of imperialist Gothic, at a time when kind of these fears are very much on the rise, and there is kind of more anti-Semitism, British Empire, that kind of thing, with the money streaming out, that version doesn't have the rat plague thing, which is often seen for like a kind of infestation of a recolonization of England from foreigners, whereas the version that does has somebody that might have been in a romantic relationship with somebody who was Jewish or had Jewish heritage. So it's kind of a mix and match of where you're getting your arguments from. I don't see it, or I can see how it could be seen like that. And if it was, I don't think it was intentional. Put it that way. I can't see it in the Murnau version.
From my reading before I did my review on TFM of Eggers' version, like just because I had run across it and I'd not really thought of it before, scholars don't have reason to believe that Murnau was, intentionally anti-Semitic. But I mean, it's not hard to read in these foreigners coming in and taking our property and killing our people, spreading plague. The
trouble with that is you can do that for pretty much any kind of classic horror monster narrative. And I think something like that is one of those ones that it obviously is in some texts, and there are a lot of people like that. They'll put stuff like that in their text, Lovecraft being one of the major ones. But it's also a kind of thing that as soon as you think it might be there, you're going to see it everywhere. And so you do have to do a little bit of proper weighing up of, do we think it was actually intentional?
Well, we have people who
DW
think
Griffith, yes.
we have people who think a Nazi salute was not a Nazi salute. So people will read whatever
Yes.
they want into
It's
whatever
like-
they want.
Yeah, I'm just gonna put it out. That was stupid. The Nazis are saying it was a Nazi salute. Like the Nazis in Germany currently are saying it was a Nazi salute.
Yeah.
Sod off anyone that says it wasn't. Like
Yeah.
anyway, sorry about your country, Jacob.
Oh, it's okay. It would be nice if people read encoding and decoding, but whatever.
Well,
That's a lot of words.
Stuart Hall basics.
Yeah, it reads some
Back
bars.
to our theory basics. Yeah. So yeah, Nosferatu goes and gives some of the most iconic images in the world, and SpongeBob goes and essentially remakes it famous many years later. And thanks to that, this helps to solidify Dracula. I mean, it is a good film. There are times when, let's be honest, I think all of us now, that because we're so used to talkies, silent films occasionally are a slog to get through. Because it's just, we're tuned out to that way of watching and experiencing, and unless you really are a silent film aficionado, sometimes it can be a while. And especially something like this, where there are one or two pans, and the moving camera was a thing, but normally you'd strap it to a car or something like that.
Yeah.
In terms of the unchained camera work, that would be in a couple of his next film. No, so Faust was 2026. The Last Laugh was 1926. The Last Laugh was 1924, when he would team up with Karl Freund, who would pioneer the unchained camera and moving around, things like that. He would work with a lot of stuff. And then the irony, obviously, is that Karl Freund would go to America eventually and would work on, he did the Spanish Dracula, didn't he? And then did Frankenstein.
No, he was cinematographer for
Yeah.
for Todd Browning's Dracula, and then he went on to direct The Mummy. I think was like directorial debut.
I remembered you got some Dracula connection from there. It's just like it's all coming kind of full circle, and that's why the Spanish version actually has a lot more fluidity to it.
The Spanish version looks so much better.
It does.
It's like that they were practicing during the day on the main production. I think, no, actually, we'll get it right on the night shoot.
Yeah, that's essentially what Freund is doing. So yeah, then you go on through the Universal Dracula stuff. You go on through, then you get all the Abbott and Costello kind of reappearance and stuff like that. You get everyone having a laugh. Sorry, I'm building the vampire timeline. I think underappreciated is I Am Legend, in that, which essentially takes vampires and does a zombie apocalypse novel before it exists. And then you obviously get Christopher Lee redoing Dracula for like 8 films. And again, by the time you get to sort of the 50s, 60s, now a vampire is Dracula. Then when you get Blackula and all these kinds of, almost the comedy versions.
Yeah. Even when they're comedy versions or kind of spoofs or sideways looks at it, they're all still essentially Dracula, aren't they?
Yeah, even in, all the kind of rip-off small things. And again, it makes it quite hard to do any vampire stuff, which is why in kind of things like Salem Lot, Stephen King, it starts and they have to play the game where nobody knows what a vampire is and can't recognize the signs of vampires until somebody points it out. Like 3/4 of the way through the book, it's like somebody's already documented all this evidence. Really? It's like, it was called Bram Stoker. The book was called Dracula, and everyone's like, it now all clicks into place. And it's like, we knew this from page 3. We have to still play the game because otherwise it's pointless. This was my issue I had with the Wolfman that just came out, that nobody says the word werewolf. Like, do they live in a universe where werewolves don't exist? This is ridiculous.
Well, we live in a universe where werewolves don't exist. I mean,
at least the concept of a werewolf doesn't exist. So then you go through the 70s and everyone's doing the rip-off stuff and kind of spoofing, and even Hammer are dying and spoofing themselves. You get Captain Kronos, R.I.P. Horst Janssen. My true, Sod Van Helsing, Captain Kronos is my true vampire killer. And then you eventually speed up past the 77 version with Langela and Donald Pleasance, that thing in, and Sir Laurence Olivier. And then we get to 1979.
Well, and real quick before we actually get to 1979, my last points on 22, almost said Dracula, Nosferatu, are it to stop the vampire, the woman must be pure of heart, which also comes up in the 79 film. That is vital to
Virgin.
yes, virgin. And like you had mentioned, yeah, if you're going to watch old silent films, because they can be a slog to get through, the reason that the ones that are most popular, the most like expressionist and the most crazy, visually just, weird, is because those are the ones that are easiest to watch. Like Joan of Arc is easy to watch because it's so like just interesting in the way it has to visually tell its story without audio. So
Yeah.
Well, one thing you will notice about Murnau, if especially in comparison to other directors of the era, he famously hated intertitles. He didn't like how they sort the flow of his film. So there's relatively little dialogue in any Murnau film, or kind of actual transcribed dialogue. Just generally you don't see his image still talking. It only has to use intertitles when it absolutely has to, for it to make sense. So
I was going to say, and he actually did a good job with Nosferatu, because Dracula isn't the shortest book in the world. It's not the biggest by far. But my copy's 350 odd pages.
It only has a couple essays in it.
Big chunky thing. Yeah. Oh, I've suddenly remembered what I remembered why I looked up and lost my train of thought for that one article where he got Nosferatu from. The phrase, which I've now lost the thing, is also where he got the Scholomance thing, which Dracula Van Helsing reckons he was part of.
Scholarmancy sounds like really boring magic.
He goes, as I'm on the subject of thunderstorms, I may as well here mention the Scholomance, or school supposed to exist somewhere in the heart of the mountains, and where all the secrets of nature, the language of the animals, and imaginable spells and charms are taught by the devil in person. Only 10 scholars are admitted at a time, and one in the course of learning has expired, and 9 of them are released to return to their homes. The 10th scholar is detained by the devil as payment, and mounted upon a Ismeju, or dragon, which I think perhaps, considering Dracul is either dragon or devil, depending on your translation.
I thought it was son of the dragon.
Yeah, but then other people have changed it to son of the devil, depending on where you want to go to it. He becomes henceforth the devil's aide de camp and assists him in making the weather, that is, preparing the thunderbolts. And this is from the same text where he gets Nosferatu from. So genuine academic scholarship. There you go. Also, I should point out for the geography, very quickly, Bram Stoker's brother wrote like whole books on kind of like, I think he was part of the army and traveled that area a lot. So wrote books on kind of the geography and the layout. So a lot of the descriptions Stoker just nicked from his brother's work.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, please go on to Herzog.
My last tangent is watch The Last Laugh over Nosferatu if you have to watch one of the two.
And I'll say Faust is very good.
I'll say Sunrise is very good.
This is it.
There we go. That's our ranking of Murnau mainstream films.
Yeah, so 57 years later, another German, funny enough, a F.W. Murnau superfan, Werner Herzog, decided he'd have a go at doing his own version of a Nosferatu. Now, funny enough, Dracula, the work, had just come into the public domain at the time, which is the main reason I think Herzog said he decided to use the original names, even though it's still in setting and in tone and everything else. It's more like kind of the Murnau film than it is Stoker's, but it's got the same general plot points and kind of passage of events and everything.
Stoker's wife rolling over in her grave.
I will say it's a weird moment when of the 3 Nosferatu versions, like the Murnau version is the shortest and probably the quickest in pace.
Yeah.
All of them. Like this one is just like, we said like some silent films are a slog to get through. In fairness to Herzog, he takes his damn sweet time with this film.
Oh, but yeah, I mean that's classic Herzog. I mean he's never seen like a picturesque landscape he doesn't want to linger on, It's...
He should have fed the film through the camera faster.
Yeah, or just break up, your vampire movie with kind of debates about faith and dreams and man's relationship with nature. It's very Herzogian. I mean, it always themes, try and test themes are there, and he's not going to let adapting Dracula get in the way of doing kind of film he normally does.
Very
He's basically-
romantic in the capital R sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, whenever he's not like doing anything that actually demands like gothic visuals, he's perhaps almost like verite style, almost like pseudo documentary. He spends a bit of time, more time, I think, than definitely than the Murnau version, possibly more than Herzog. Is it more than the Eggers version as well? Spends a bit more time with kind of the gypsy kind of characters, in the village and kind of their kind of traditions and folklore and everything. He seems generally interested in that. It wouldn't be surprising if he wouldn't surprise me if kind of he brought people, locals on set and kind of talked to them about that. So what can we have in, to spice up the scene a bit, just make it feel a bit more grounded and real. I'll just put my camera here and you just do what you want to do, I'll make
More
it work.
occult stuff.
Yeah. And he really did like Bruno Gans of the Downfall memes fame. is this version's Harker and Herzog, because he's Herzog and he's a sadist, really did send him climbing up that mountain just to get that shot. Just for real. It was like in his period dress and his very unsensible shoes. Like, climb that mountain, Bruno.
Really, please.
I mean, it's a beautiful film. I mean, Jesus,
Yeah.
as all Herzog films are, it's just the way he captures like nature and like pretty landscapes and everything. It's just it's stunning to look at. I'd say probably the scene at the start in the town probably looks a bit kind of TV movie. It's just. I don't know. It doesn't look as kind of captivating. It looks a little bit cheap, but we don't spend too much time in the town at the start, so it doesn't really matter. Herzog, when he was talking about why he chose to do kind of Nosferatu and kind of why he wanted to tell his version of the story, he had a bit of a few thoughts about it. Should I try and do a Herzog impression? It's probably ill-advised. It's more than a horror film. Nosferatu is not a monster. It's an ambivalent, masterful force of change. When the plague threatens, people throw their property into the streets. They discard their bourgeois trappings. A reevaluation of life and meaning takes place. So, yeah, that was Herzog's thoughts on it. I don't think there's ever been asked a question when he couldn't. He doesn't do like short answers. He'll go off on a huge kind of soliloquy, about various theoretical frameworks.
I wish I had known that quote before watching the movie, because that explains a lot of the movie to me now.
Yeah, I mean, they all the versions, they have like their own bring their own kind of little kind of additions to the tale. Obviously, you have Murnau, the Dracula, the vampire. The vampire being killed by sunlight. Herzog's thing is that Castle Dracula is sort of imaginary almost. It's like in like a dream realm almost. It just kind of it only appears sometimes, and when when you're looking for it essentially, and then it disappears kind of in the daylight again. So it's sort of on another plane, which is kind of a bit weird and metaphysical, but again a very Herzog kind of idea. He really leads into like the plague angle on this. So, there's shipping in thousands of rats, which were treated horribly by the sounds of it, because he could only get white rats and he wanted them to be black. So he tried dyeing them with some chemical, which kind of, if it didn't kill them, made them very uncomfortable. They started chewing, basically gnawing holes in themselves, to try and get this dye out their fur. So he basically ended up with all these rats that look vaguely grey.
He wanted black rats, but unfortunately Peter Jackson was using all of them, and he couldn't even get one black rat. So.
Also, he has the sailor not wearing shoes while like kicking them around in the dirt.
Yeah. I mean, when we do come to the Eggers version, again, he uses like the rats angle again, and I feel like for doubting him, I thought that because there were that many rats and they're moving in such a way, I was thinking, God, they can't all be real, surely. But no, they are. Eggers shipped all those rats as well, and got a very good rat wrangler on set to get to see what he needs to do. So, I mean, it was possibly naive of me to think that Eggers would use CG for rats, but. But yeah, I think if it's an available resource, maybe you should do for most animals these days. Really, I don't think there's much excuse to get that many small animals in a distressed state in a small, cramped environment.
Now I wish Robbie Williams was the chimp in Speed Racer.
Yeah.
You really do have an obsession with that
yeah.
film, don't you?
I really do. It's very good, and I love Robbie Williams now.
And for a lot of the rats are sat eating each other as well when they arrived in this box, So again, yeah, we'll avoid all the rat cruelty in this because
it's like I'm not a CGI person, but if using CGI in Eggers' version stops like thousands of rats being like killed because they're eating each other, I'll take it.
Yeah, he infamously had a volatile relationship with his regular leading man, Klaus Kinski, who he has in play Dracula in this, using the same makeup, exactly the same makeup as the Murnau version, essentially, that kind of rat-like version. But I say Kinski's even more kind of sinister than Shrek was, Shrek was in the role, because I mean he's like a volatile presence anyway, but it's sort of this kind of introverted but kind of edgy kind of character. He feels like he's just going to kind of do something strange and inhuman at any moment. He's quite twitchy and kind of uncanny.
He seems socially awkward.
Yeah, so yeah, kind of. But it's like there's another.
He's
kind
been
of
in a box for 400 years. Give him a break.
Yeah. He did. I mean, they did like kind of they're at each other's throats constantly, and he basically basically riled Kinski up basically before each scene, just kind of wound him up and stressed him out just to get the right kind of reaction if he wanted him to act more aggressively, or if he wanted him to be more subtle. He did the opposite. Hang on, what does he do for that? But basically, he emotionally and kind of psychologically manipulates him, to kind of get the kind of reaction he wanted. He quipped, I think, to the press later on that often the rats were much better behaved than Kinski was, and he also called him a great pestilence to work with. When he was asked what's it like to work with Kinski, he goes, oh, he's a great pestilence.
That extends to his personal life.
He's also on record saying that if Klaus Kinski didn't do the movie, he wasn't going to do the movie. So
yeah. I mean, that's thing. It wasn't a love-hate relationship. It was a hate-hate relationship, but they both got the best out of each other's careers. So something kind of worked between them. I think the more interesting aspects of this version is kind of what they do in like the final act. So essentially, a bit like in the Murnau version, the Van Helsing character doesn't really get to do a lot. He is there, but he's just a guy in a suit sitting in a chair,
Yeah,
just an old man.
Yeah. Whereas the Mina character, sorry, it's Lucy in this version, isn't it?
Yeah, but for some reason, I don't know why they didn't.
But she's essentially Mina. Usually, I kind of think, well, look, Mina's the kind of the introverted kind of proper kind of acceptance society one, and Lucy's the one who's a bit more out there, a bit more kind of loose and free.
The term that would be used
Loosey goosey.
The term that would be used in the book is a new woman, which was coined about 10 years beforehand.
Yeah, or you could, if you're going to be crude, you could say the prudes and the slut, but we won't say that. Oh shit!
I believe in technical terms that would be called the whore and the Madonna.
Yeah. So Isabella Gianni plays Lucy in this, but she essentially because when Harker kind of gets back, so he, as in the old version, Harker races back after his escapes, to try and stop Dracula, from doing what he wants to do. He's basically arrives like a broken, like hollowed out shell of a man. I mean, I think of the three versions, I think I'd say Nicholas Hoult kind of plays the fear angle of the character really well. But I think in terms of just being a complete hollowed out shell of man, complete PTSD, to the point where you can't really function in society, I think possibly Bruno Ganz is the best to play in that, I think.
Well, he is a vampire.
Spoilers. Yeah. I mean, that's
spoilers for this 50-year-old movie.
So essentially, Lucy kind of almost takes on some of the Van Helsing kind of aspects of the character. She kind of does a bit more of the investigation, and she's quite active and kind of independent. And
That's to free up her kind of vampire changing bits to give over to Jonathan Harker.
Essentially, yeah, and yeah, as you say, yeah. Towards the end, yeah, he does eventually turn. He has been infected, and which kind of implies even after Nosferatu has been destroyed in the same manner, he's destroyed by the sunlight. There's this other problem. It's almost left on a cliffhanger, really, that the infection, the curse is carrying on, through someone else.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the kind of he's basically slumped in a chair for like most of it, and then he kind of starts to rally around and kind of he's obviously trying to work stuff out, and they've kind of noticed his odd behaviour, and just to cover their backs, they put a ring of salt around him. I think.
Yes.
Yeah, Sam and Dean show up, and
which obviously like a classic kind of occult kind of trope. And they basically he can't cross that, so he brings the maze in and says, "Oh, someone's left some salt on the ground."
That's the equivalent of in the book, and then pretty much everything else. I think even in Carmilla as well, they put like flowers or a wreath of like garlic around the neck or something like that. And it's always that they get the maid to come in and go, "Oh, it stifles me so, please remove it," kind of thing, and open the window. And it happens in every single version. This is the equivalent of it because he's essentially being amorphous with the roles that everyone plays in terms of the characters.
Well, apparently it's consecrated hosts that are like ground up and not salt. I also thought it was salt because
because that's the classic thing. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, that does make sense.
Yeah.
And then he rips off his crucifix too.
Yeah.
Seeing Klaus Kinski kind of comically react to crucifixes is funny.
Yeah. Then there's that line which I think kind of sums up kind of Herzog's version. It's just kind of what Lucy says to the Van Helsing character. Faith is the amazing faculty of men which enables us to believe things we know to be untrue. And I think that the whole Herzog version of this is all about that. It's kind of going to question our kind of perception of reality and kind of folklore and kind of what is and isn't there, and what's in the hearts and minds of man, and kind of how it affects our faith. And is there such a thing as like a true evil, or is it just various kind of shades of grey that we're kind of capable of?
Which again is slowly building on kind of the supernatural occult elements and those kind of belief factors. And I forgot to mention, because I said I was going to come back to the castle in the Murnau version. I've forgotten this links back into the supernatural stuff. In the Murnau version, the last thing you see is the castle or Castle Dracula's castle kind of disintegrating, a bit like sort of Fall of the House of Usher, perhaps, and falling into thing, or Lord of the Rings, right at the end. One, how does the castle know? But we think this was actually possibly an idea, or it was in there, whether Murnau knew about it. Stoker originally had a couple of paragraphs where after Dracula is killed, Dracula's castle like explodes into a ball of flame or dies or something like that, and he crossed it out. So not only did he think about doing it and then linking them supernaturally in that way, he got rid of it to get rid of all these kind of extra kind of supernatural elements, so that the only ones you've got are those that you can kind of, they might be kind of beyond the normal, but they are kind of scientifically identifiable. Something like the castle just would not be. But Murnau either adds it back in or came up with it somehow of his own to kind of strengthen the occult stuff that was going on between him and Nock, and then you get that kind of emphasized further more and more as the versions progress.
Roger Ebert includes it in his great movies list, and he had a nice write-up about it. He said, Herzog's pictorial eye is not often enough credited. His films always upstage it with their themes. But look here at his control of the colour palette, his off-center compositions of the dramatic counterpoints of light and dark. Here is a film that does horror to the seriousness of vampires. No, I don't believe in them, but if they were real, this is how they must have looked. So, I mean, it is obviously like, I suppose which obviously is an idea that kind of Eggers will build on. It's like, if they were real, how would they look, how would they act, kind of, and how would they make sense in this world, even if it's like an exaggerated version of our own. But I don't think enough people have seen this version. I think most people will have seen, if they haven't seen the whole thing, they'll know all the key images from the original Nosferatu, and obviously
They'll have
Eggs's
got
version.
shown it in a class somewhere.
Yeah, and Eggs's version is obviously doing pretty well. It's it's doing all right at the box office, but I don't think enough people have kind of often might have skipped past this one. But I would say it's a really interesting kind of counterpoint. It's a good, it's different enough, so you not feel like you're watching the same film twice, but there's enough new ideas. It's really striking to look at, and some really interesting ideas, and Herzog exploring all his usual themes in the usual depth, but kind of with like a kind of supernatural occult kind of twist. Yeah, it's well worth looking at.
I think the documentary style is what stood out to me the most. Like it does, it rings very much like he took this and was like, okay, now I'm gonna kind of make it seem real, and the parallel between like the people in the village when he goes to Transylvania, and then the people dancing in the street as Lucy goes to finally meet Dracula, whatever he's called here, the vampire.
It is Dracula in this one,
Yes. And also the scene in Eggers with like, I will come to you 3 nights. That version in this movie is so funny, where he just like walks in and goes, "Hey, what's up? You wanna be my girlfriend?"
It's a very
kind of
casual kind of sidling in, isn't it? Yeah. He would Kinski would go on to do like a kind of a sort of sequel a few years later, Vampire in Venice.
Nosferatu.
Yeah, so actually
that's a Doctor Who episode, Sam.
Yeah,
hit the nos too fast.
Yeah.
But I have yet. By the way, I've yet to read the Joe Hill book, NOS4R2. I will get round to it at some point.
Yeah. But essentially, he turns up basically playing the same character, playing another vampire with the same makeup, but just in a different location, completely different story, and just cash in on it. Essentially, it's not meant to be very good. I haven't seen it
though. When you say not meant to be, do you mean they made it poorly on purpose, or people don't like it?
No, just apparently not very good.
The critical word is not positive.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very. I don't want to use the word surreal because it's not. It's slow and dreamlike, and that kind of almost a trance version of Dracula. The contemplative, meditative, taking the framework and going, what if we should actually pity Dracula instead? Which is a comment which Mina makes. I can't remember where it is, something along the lines of, I suppose that anybody like that we should actually have to pity in some way. It's hunted so long. I am very quickly trying to skip through a PDF copy on.
Was Herzog doing it in Cell Dracula like 50 years early?
Very possibly. I can't find the exact quote now, obviously. But so Mina says something along those lines, which may have been one of the reasons to get it from. Moving on, I want to very quickly read the actual description.
Hang on,
of Dracula.
we'll come to that. I want to introduce it first, because the highly anticipated 2024 Robert Eggers version of Nosferatu was released at Christmas. It is such a different film from these two for a variety of reasons. But yes, now you can go ahead and read the quote from the book.
This is the thing that will get discussed and is still being discussed. I believe Eggers has recently released a comment on it. But the description that you get of Dracula. His face was a very strong aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and particularly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily round the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy moustache, was fixed and rather cruel looking, with particularly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, the cheeks firm though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. I redraw attention again to the heavy moustache.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There are people saying, "Oh my God, I couldn't take him seriously because he had a mustache."
But he's not the first Dracula that was a moustache on film. John Carradine played Dracula a couple of times in the 40s for Universal, and he had a moustache. So.
Oh, and also, as we've explained earlier, vampire media innovates at every turn. It doesn't matter whether or not original Dracula had a mustache. It doesn't matter if Nosferatu or Orlok had a mustache. It doesn't matter because you can do whatever you want.
And every picture you see of Vlad Tepes,
Yeah,
is that a side-on view with the mustache?
yeah. I mean, that was apparently the main reason for the look. Apart from the Stoker description, it was because Eggers is obsessive, in terms when it comes to detail and historical detail. He said, "What would a noble from that era, from that part of the world, look like?" He said they would have a moustache. We wouldn't find a man in that part of the world at that time who didn't have a moustache. So.
Well, I mean, even until sort of the early 1900s in Britain, if you were in kind of the armed forces and things like that, you weren't allowed to not have a moustache. You had to have a moustache. It was like law. If you couldn't, you could. I'm not sure if you could get court-martialed, but the equivalent of, because it apparently made you look more kind of trustworthy and things like that. It was a kind of sense of trustworthiness. So you would have a moustache.
Looking at
unless you're in the Navy, in which case you'd have a beard as well.
Looking at a portrait of Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad III, from the 16th century, he has a mustache. Curious. Yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't matter if it's realistic or not, because you could do whatever you want. And I think it would be boring if they just took the same Murnau and Klaus Kinski look and just did that. I'll be honest, it's a little silly looking. And my biggest issue watching these two films, the previous two, is that to me they are very quaint. And with Herzog's, reading that quote, reading his perspective on Dracula and vampires, that sort of changes my view of that. It's not meant to be horror, but like, these are two horror films. They don't scare me at all. I kind of laugh at their silliness and try my best. But I think with Herzog especially, it's the music in like the first half, and then the sort of sinister score in the second half. Like, they contrast well, but the first half is not at all scary to me.
No, it's interesting because of the three kind of, Herzog's version is a kind of a mediation on the idea of Dracula. It's not meant to be a scare fest. The Murnau version we don't find silly now because a load of the stuff that has been built upon over the last sort of 100 years started there. They're the first time round, they're not going to get it exact the first time. And now that we've been exposed to it so long, seeing the original is like, this is a bit of a laugh. There are still absolutely iconic things, but it's not got and there's bits which, under the right circumstances, if you're, could be a little bit chilling, but it's not got the absolute, terror that it's got.
Yeah, it's like saying the first printing press was not as efficient as modern printing presses. Like, it's a different thing that got us there.
Yeah, with the 2024/5, depending on when it came out for you, version, I mean, there are a few things that I had issue with in it, but one of the things I did like is that Dracula, and I'm calling him Dracula, I don't care, felt like an absolute force. And that was kind of the thing in the book, that he wasn't there, but it was literally every single thing that happened, you felt that Dracula was there, and he was a complete power, not just a character. He was a force of nature kind of embodied, and that is something you definitely get in this version.
Yeah, we've already outlined the plot. The plot is real estate agent, evil boss, go to Transylvania, meet scary vampire, come back home, sick, wife stalked, vampire want wife, people trying to stop vampire. they stop vampire because of sun and cockcrow. Story over. Now, the big change for Eggers, and I think, a lot of that comes from, feminist film scholarship, is the expansion of the wife's role. Ellen, that is her name.
Well, yeah, well, she's the lead now for one thing, isn't she?
Yes, she is now the focus of it. And instead of being a woman pure of heart, she is a woman who has been haunted by this entity for her entire life. That's the very opening of the film, is this possession, or I've seen people call it a rape scene. There's
it's sort of like astral plane kind of violation, isn't it? And she kind of opens the door to him, and then he takes advantage of that. That's kind of kicks off the whole chain of events. She's
you have to allow me in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what Eggers, talking about Herzog's version is like documentary like, and trying to present this naturalistic presentation of the vampire. That's Eggers' whole thing. He takes these supernatural elements and grounds them in a sort of hyper naturalistic, and you could take issue with his specific use of language and all that stuff. I know you guys have tiny little issues with like certain words or whatever, but overall he's creating this atmosphere of you are immersed in this time period visually, audibly, and then I'm going to put this sinister score underneath it the entire time that maintains the tone of the story. But yeah, the biggest change, Ellen is now the lead. Thomas is just sort of a vehicle to help Dracula get the vampire. Husband is getting vampire to location where vampire now owns property.
I would actually say that the biggest change for me in this is that Van Helsing, I can't remember if they even call him Van Helsing or Bulwer or whatever he is in the original. It's Van Helsing. Willem Dafoe actually does stuff.
Von Franz.
Von Franz. Yeah, they've actually given him a completely different name from the character in the Murnau version.
But they actually do make him essentially Van Helsing rather than just somebody that's there.
Someone in that awkward halfway point between like occultism and science, and trying to
white magician, as he is occasionally known.
And then he's the occult expert who's like, oh, I have this book that's going to tell us the plot. And then you have the actual doctor played by Ralph Ineson, who reflects sort of the medical patriarchal treatment of women in that era, where it is a result of society being perpetuated by him, but his solutions are tie her down, ether her, tighten her corset.
I mean, I still laugh at that scene. I mean, it's such a dark scene, but it's also, you got to laugh because it's just so kind of wrong and kind of, it's like the Modern Nine, and basically they're just kind of tossing aside like all these kind of clearly possessed kind of convulsions just as like garden variety hysteria. Essentially, it's like, she's a woman. She's just a woman go through one of her things.
Yeah, and if you were in the 19th century, I mean, where does the word hysteria come from, guys? It's it's this sort of thing is so baked into medical science that it's still screwing over women in 21st century America.
Well, I mean, even things like the word lunatic come from the moon, from Luna. So that was the whole thing, that they turn mad on the full moon. And that's where you get it lunatic from. So the whole thing is related to occultism, essentially.
And obviously, Eggers throughout his work is he's creating folk horror in a sense. It's based on stories and legends, and with The Witch, it's it is focused on Christianity, but then you have the occult, creepy figure out in the woods. The way that because it's Hamlet with ghosts and all that. Whatever that movie's called is
The Northman.
Thank you. I almost said The Barbarian.
I would like to point out though that the original Norse tales with Amleth has no ghost of his father.
Oh my god.
The ghost of the father is literally a Shakespearean invention.
I wonder if somebody was like, that's not how the story doesn't have ghosts in it in the 1600s watching Hamlet.
Very possibly.
What's his other movie? He has a third
And
one.
the
Lighthouse.
Lighthouse, which is literally, I completely buy. That's what would happen if you had to spend a month in a lighthouse with Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, I mean that one's just the most bizarre of all of them. But yeah, whatever. I think with Nosferatu, he's sort of bringing a culmination of everything he's done in the previous films, and really focusing on a movie that he loves and has a passion for and wanted to bring to the modern age.
Well, he was wanting to make it since he finished The Witch.
Yeah,
and he just shoved another two movies
but
in
basically,
front of it.
he saw the original film on VHS as a child, when he was about 10, I think, and that kind of kickstarted his fascination with it. And then he directed like a high school play based on it, bizarrely, and then did like a more professional kind of stage production a few years later. But
I will say, though, once again, this film proves my theory that nobody cares about remakes if it's done by a director with some credit.
Yes.
No, the amount of people online that were like, "Oh my god, all Hollywood does is remakes," and this comes out, I've not heard that line once about this movie. Like, not even when it was like announced.
Nope.
It proves the point.
Yeah, if somebody can make it different and they can make it, I don't want to say it's necessarily unique, but I think definitely compared to the other two films, it is unique. And
it's nice to have a genuinely scary, monstrous vampire again. I mean,
that is exactly where I was going.
Which have him as a shambling corpse wearing like regal furs, and just barely holding everything together with like the force of his like dark will, literally have him. He doesn't delicately go for someone's neck. He just kind of latches onto their chest above their heart and just sucks them dry. And he brutally kills.
Tradition.
Brutally kills two children almost on camera. It's not something you see in most vampire films.
Yeah, there are so many moments in the film that did actually scare me during my first theater experience. The scene where Hutter goes to meet Orlok for the first time in the original is, I mean, it's a 1920s film. They're establishing the syntax of horror. It is what it is.
With the under cranking to get it like slightly fast forward. Yeah. The coach arriving.
In 1980 or 79, it's just kind of, oh, hello, I am Count Dracula. Welcome
very
to my
ethereal
castle.
Moonlight as he comes along,
It's a bit silly for me. And then this movie, it is horrifying the entire time, and I put a lot of that, obviously it's on the atmosphere created through the cinematography and the music, but also on Nicholas Hoult. Like, he is such an incredible scared actor in that movie. He looks like he's being tortured on camera. Just
second time in
presence.
2 years that Dracula's got him under control. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I do just love how the camera's used in that scene, though, just kind of keeping Orlok, just out of visual range, in the shadows, or just out of focus. But then it's like he's at one side of his chair, then he's at the other side of the chair immediately, and then back again. It's like he's not moving. Kind of.
This for
like
the dinner scene,
anything of this plane, basically.
The breathing too.
Like the slow reveal. It's literally like a death rattle, isn't it? It's just...
Well, there's a reason it's shot like that, and that's because Eggers, aside from maybe like 3 instances, refuses to have a shot last like any shorter than about 20 seconds. So he's going to do it all in one shot if he can.
And I don't remember if you mentioned it on or off camera, Kieran, the scene with the carriage, where it actually does create a sense of dream logic in the approach of it. And so much of this film is like, it seems like a dream. Characters will wake up and go, oh, the scene that just happened. And it seems like a vision.
I would say that scene in like the crossroads, like illuminated by the moonlight, just where it's like he's almost like he's in a void, basically. It's probably one of the most stunning kind of individual shots I've seen in a long time. It's just so good.
It is beautiful.
And he floats into the carriage too whenever it shows up. He doesn't walk into it. The camera sits inside and he goes, ooh. It's the little things like that really take it up a notch for me in terms of creating immersive horror and putting me into what is going on, putting me into the characters' heads. Some of the iconic moments that stay. We talked about the hand floating over the town, the beach covered in crosses, like the graves on the beach. That's in all three movies. Let's see. You got the Aaron Taylor Johnson character gets actually expanded instead of just saying "take care of my wife, goodbye." He's kind of the skeptic. He has a role.
Yeah, the Arthur Holmwood, Lord Godalming character.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's possibly like one of the less interesting characters, but I can see why he's there. I don't object to him having the role. It's just he's one of those people. It just doesn't seem like he quite belongs in that era in the same way that like Willem Dafoe or Nicholas Hoult does for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is the dialogue he's given. It's slightly too modern. It's just there's something that very slightly for me didn't ring true to the period that was being created. It felt a couple of decades out. Yeah,
and Willem Dafoe's character obviously very much feels off that era, and everything he comes out with, just sounds just so right. But a particular note his wonderful quote, which you should get on T-shirts. "I've seen things in this world that would make Isaac Newton crawl back into his mother's womb."
Yeah. It's beautiful.
I do wish he had been played by someone else. He's the only actor that really... for a second, Nicholas Hoult took me out because I was like, that's Renfield. What are we doing here? But then Willem Dafoe, the whole time I'm going, that's Willem Dafoe. I wish it had been a different actor, but...
That's the trouble with Willem Dafoe, though. Yeah. He's always going to be Willem Dafoe now.
He's the Rock, but a better actor. Like...
No, he's the same. The person I have that with is Jesse Eisenberg.
Him too.
I can't see Jesse Eisenberg as a character.
I can't see Lex
Jesse
Luthor.
Eisenberg. Yeah, like he's just Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, but of course, casting obviously, Eggers, has this like more stable of actors, Ralph Ineson and they've both done 3 films with them each, but Willem Dafoe's casting is obviously another reference to Nosferatu because he plays Max Schreck in Shadow of the Vampire, which is the film about what if Murnau found a real vampire and made a film with him.
I think Lily Rose Depp is incredible. I've seen mixed reviews, but I think that like because she's not in a lot, that could also lend to it, but she's having to essentially become the protagonist of this story now, and I thought she pulled it off. I think I've seen criticism of her possession scenes and say, "Oh, that's putting it too over." I like the possession scenes. Like
I don't think you can overplay possession scenes. I think if you're going to do them, just go for it.
Yeah. And I don't know if they CGI her eyes, but like she's doing a good job of seeming like a creepy ghost young woman.
Yes.
Or as good as you could get away with, I think.
Yeah, it's probably the most like standard Hollywood sort of tropey scare in it. In terms of like making something that is kind of jump scary because it's a little bit out of nowhere.
Yeah, and for once he actually cuts within about 3 seconds of each shot.
Yeah. Obviously, we get to see Bill Skarsgård hang dong. Equal rights.
Nicholas Hoult now owns that, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah. I'm amazed it's still there after all those centuries, really.
And the biggest change, of course, is instead of the implication of sex, now it is sex. Like he's trying to bang this young woman. He wants a relationship with her. He knows who she is, and that's how the film ends, is their sexual embrace as he feeds on her as well. And then
the light comes up and they turn into that painting.
Yes. Yeah. Another Eggers classic. Take a painting and put it in your movie.
We all do that.
True. Yeah. Every frame is a painting if you think about it.
I mean, I do like how he kind of references as Herzog did. He references the Murnau imagery, but doesn't outright recreate it. He does his own twist on it. I think I think Herzog possibly did a few more directly kind of replicating, which possibly the both didn't work as well. But yeah, I think yes, he does a shadowy hand. He does kind of things for just images thrown against walls and everything. It's really clever stuff with moonlight, but it's all very much his own thing. I think his own take on those kind of iconic images, which is good to see.
And I think that's the case because it is more of a combination of Dracula and Nosferatu, rather than another remake of Nosferatu. There's so much stuff that is closer to the book, even if it's just actually having a. I believe the technical term is the Crew of Light. Is in the vampire hunters, or at least heard it a couple of times. I can't remember if it's in the book or the Group of Light. In the fact that you now actually have everyone together. I don't think there's an equivalent of Quincy Morris in any of the which is the only person missing, who is kind of in there along with Lord Godalming, essentially, just for near the end when they're like, actually going to hunt down Dracula across a continent is going to require funding, and they go, we're rich, we have funding for you, which is half of their job. You'd like Quincy Morris if you haven't read the book, Jacob, because he's from Texas.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's all I need.
It usually takes a bit more explanation, like why is there a cowboy here all of a sudden in this Victorian horror melodrama?
Quincy Morris, vampire hunter.
Yeah, essentially. Well, Quincy Morris, I'm trying to get together with Lucy. Oh, I've been rejected. And then in the same day, Seward and Lord Godalming propose to her. She gets proposed to 3 times in the same day. And then, a lot of the kind of analysis in the book is the fact that, oh, hang on, they're sharing literally bodily fluids by doing the blood transfer. So it's like, oh, she's now essentially a polygamist,
Yeah, because in the Coppola version, it's Cary Elwes, isn't he, who plays...
I think so.
I think, and then it's Rich D. Grant as Seward. I seem to remember.
Oh, by the way, from the Herzog one, I forgot to mention at the end when they're like, "Arrest Van Helsing," to that old man, and he's like, "I don't have any guns. How am I going to arrest him?" Well,
I don't get the point of that.
Take him to the jail. Everybody's dead.
Yeah, there's a line about we don't have any police anymore.
They're all dead because of the plague,
Didn't you see all those coffins outside?
It's so funny. I love that scene. But what made me think of it is, real quick, I do like the guy that plays Knock. I like that he's creepy, doing blood rituals in his office.
It's definitely a different take. So Sam McBurney is best known in the UK as a star of TV dramas and sitcoms. He's very much a TV actor. He's been in Mission Impossibles and the crappy first adaptation of His Dark Materials, but essentially
he was in Conjuring 2 apparently.
Yeah, he's in a lot of TV shows. He's in the Tom Hollander sitcom Rev. That's basically the antagonist. This real dickhead of a bishop.
He was in Deathly Hallows Part 1. The fact that I've seen lots of things with him in and don't know him. Oh, he voices Creature. That's why.
But I wasn't expecting him to be to be naked and biting heads off pigeons. I mean,
blood pouring out of his mouth. It's great. That's the exact way to do Knock compared to watching the other two.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most feral Knock we've ever had, isn't it? It's like the guy in the Murnau film was just this little goblin guy just sitting on a roof giggling at people, just
reading his obvious occult papers.
Again, each one has a thing to do. The Murnau version is very much you're still in silence, so you're still very slightly overacting, because that's the only way to get information across is by an exaggerated movement. The Herzog version is very introspective, and therefore everything's more quiet and subdued and everything like that, and it's a quieter rumination on the idea of Dracula rather than
the idea of Knock.
Whereas this one is, I'm going to see if I can go all out urban kind of Victorian. Fin de siècle or whatever they call it, end of the century kind of gothic, and just dominate the idea of Dracula and everything.
There's a scene in the Herzog one where he goes, "How can I serve you, my master?" And he kind of like gives him a little smack. And everything with Klaus Kinski for me is hilarious. Like I can't help it. In this one, it has that same scene. He shows up and is like, "How can I serve you, master?" And he berates him and abuses him, and like it's a lot more thorough. Yeah, and anyway, what reminded me
the kind of old war general is still there, because that's what he was. He led massive armies over bloodthirsty battles and slaughtered hundreds of thousands
of the Ottomans.
You're going to have some kind of commanding presence there, and he actually does manage to get that across.
Yeah.
So well done for Eggers.
What reminded me of the end of that other movie is that the end of Eggers' version, you know, they have sex and then they die with the son, and you know, very cool shots. I think Herzog's death is it's pretty good, especially when you compare it to Murnau's, and then obviously Eggers is taking it even more up a notch. But do you think that Eggers' Nosferatu or Anora is the best final sex scene of 2024?
I didn't get to see Anora.
Oh, Sam, what do you think?
It depends on what you want. Do you want like just a really strong visual to end on, or just complete emotional devastation? I mean, yeah.
I know exactly which one is which.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're both very strong, but kind of they're not kind of they're strange bedfellows, aren't they? You know, you don't expect to be comparing them in many regards.
Unless you're at the Oscars.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I really love. I saw it 3 times. Yeah. I would vote for Eggers' Nosferatu a 3rd time if I could.
Yeah. Even a 4th time.
I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Yeah.
It is available to purchase digitally on Apple for me for $25, and I'm really considering it.
Yeah. Now, I want to get on disc because it's going to be extended on physical media. Apparently, he's got some more scenes.
Is he doing a black and white version, or was that something else he was doing a black and white version of?
I'm not sure. To be honest, I haven't heard that. I just heard that he's adding in about 15 minutes extra or something. So
I want to see the lighthouse colorized.
Yeah, I mean, on like that. I mean, just kind of before I wrap up, just I want you to do 2 rankings for me. So, how would you rank these 3 versions of Nosferatu in terms of, well, I mean, obviously they're all good, aren't they? But in terms of generally gut feeling, kind of how would you place them one above the other? And also, how would you rank Eggers' 4 films to date?
Oh, real quick before we do that, I do want to say that part of it is in black and white due to the tricks of light that he uses and the desaturation and all that color grading.
It's lit by moonlight, isn't it?
I was going to say, I will say that there are parts of kind of that moonlight going to the castle part where, depending on the lighting in the cinema screen that you've got now, I don't know what it's like for you in the US, Jacob, but here in the UK, you know how when you used to go to the cinema, all the lights went out? They don't do that anymore. They have 1 or 2 spots on lower, essentially for health and safety reasons. If the old deer has to get up, they're not tripping over and cracking their head open in the middle of the screening. But that also means that when there are night scenes where they've just about got it so that you can see stuff, but it's still dark, with those lights on, you get a little bit of glare. So there are night scenes where I was watching it when he's going to the castle and you've got the whole kind of approach of Orlok and things like that. And I'm like, I can't tell if this is too dark or not.
Yeah.
Because there are points that are so on the borderline. I'm like, this could either be just on the borderline of this is really nicely lit, or this could be absolute crap because I can't see anything. And I don't know, because the screening I was in, I think I was sat underneath that spotlight just by accident. So it's just like, I can't tell. And this is something, you know me in moonlight scenes. I'm like, every moonlight, shoot it in black and white like it's from the 40s, where it's just like lit up like daylight, please. At least then I can see stuff. So I will criticize the Eggers movie on that, but I don't know if I can.
In my blacked out theater, it looked great. Give Blasky the Oscar, please. All right.
It's like it's so on the borderline that I'm like, I'm fairly sure this is fine, but I can't tell if it's crap or not. In terms of Eggers' filmography, I'll do this very quickly. First for me is still The Northman. This slots in second, and then Lighthouse, and then The Witch in last.
Okay, I would go The Witch in first, Nosferatu second, The Lighthouse, then Northman in last.
I really hate you for making me do this because my initial answer is each one first, so all four tied for first.
Okay, fine. No, that's your answer.
But if you made me go 4 Northman, 3 Witch, 2 Lighthouse, 1 this, but that's just I don't know.
I love we've all got a completely different order. That is great.
For me, it comes down to which one do I want to watch the most.
Yeah. Again, that would be my ordering of doing it. I have issues with The Witch because I can't stand the language being used. That puts me off. I just can't break through it. The Lighthouse I can appreciate, but I also hate the fact that it's essentially the same thing, just recycled about 5 times. It's the same basic pattern, and they just change up the weirdness of it slightly. This is very good. I still have a couple of issues with some of the language. I think there should have been changing of pacings very slightly at certain times. The dreamlike quality of this film is very good, but there are also times where I'm like, okay, I'm starting to nod off now. That, and then The Northman again has its issues, but it's at least fun. It just gutter punches sometimes, and I'm maybe slightly biased because when I went on my geography field trip, I did go to 1 or 2 of the locations. So the in The Northman, the big when he gets rescued by the Valkyrie, the big waterfall he kind of flies over, like I have photos from where I'm standing nearby that, and stuff like that. So I'm slightly biased, but I also think it is just generally the best one.
The Northman's a little bit of a slog for me. I don't know why in particular, but this movie for me takes what I love about The Lighthouse and puts it on something with better, more traditional story. So that's how I kind of parse those two. But I think The Lighthouse is his best film if I had to pick one.
Yeah. And in terms of the 3 versions of Nosferatu that we've seen, I'll go for this personally. I can't get past the iconicness and of kind of how it changed kind of cinema in the original Nosferatu. So I think it was the Murnau film was still the number 1 for me. Then Eggers, then very part. I'm gonna put Herzog in third because I do still really like it, but. Of the 3, I'm less likely to go back to see it again. Soon. I can see myself watching seen the Murnau version plenty of times, and I can see myself watching the Eggers version plenty as well. So
I have exactly the same order as Sam.
Yeah.
Mine is most want to watch. I'm gonna put Nosferatu 1. Oh no, hang on, they're all Nosferatu. Eggers Nosferatu 1, Herzog 2, and Murnau 3. Since I have those other 2, like I prefer talkies. I prefer color if possible, and I think Eggers does a good job of combining the sort of sentiment of all of it and makes it horror. And Herzog, like I need to rewatch it with the new perspective, but I'm still gonna laugh at Klaus Kinski, and I'm gonna find it funny. But I like the bat shots and the landscapes. It's a nice looking film.
Like I think with I think I gave on my blog, I think I gave the Eggers version an 8 out of 10, in that it is very good on a technical level. But I find no emotional attachment to it in a way. So I find it very hard to kind of break in to give it a kind of higher than that, because I appreciate that it is a very, very well done picture. But that's about it,
And like I said earlier, Nosferatu is not even my favorite Murnau. Like I like The Last Laugh more.
Who's got the last laugh? Murnau, sorry.
Oh no, because I'm still alive. So, joke's on him.
Boom.
That got dark, but that's where my brain is right now. Really, he's the lucky one. He doesn't have to be alive right now.
He will rise from his grave. Maybe.
The dirt from his homeland that he's buried in.
I think we're running out of steam.
He did, yeah. Just sort of feel a nice little bit of a trivia. His skull was stolen.
Who,
and
Murnau?
it was never, and it was never returned.
Oh, but why?
That is a film right there. Somebody like necromances
The police,
Murnau
the police
back from the dead.
theorized it was for some kind of occult ritual, for some kids.
Naturally. Maybe it was made into the cuckoo clock in the Herzog 1979 film.
What, it would have made it back from America to Germany.
Yeah, I love that clock.
Boom. Right, we should wrap this up before the cock crows.
God. And Amelia, thank you for watching. Her favorite vampire and werewolf movie is Twilight, which, as we said earlier, whatever stupid aspects were not added, according to some people, you could do whatever you want with vampires. They are romantic. Basically, Edward is a better version of Herzog's Nosferatu. You know, he's romantic hero.
Yeah.
I will say very quickly, interestingly enough, in the same thing where he got Nosferatu from, just under the bits about Nosferatu in that book, it says, first cousin to the vampire, the long exploded werewolf of the Germans is here to be found, lingering yet under another name, and goes on to talk about that. So at the same time, they were exploring like werewolf stuff, as is proof by the fact that along with the massive Varney the Vampire, which is like 667,000 words long, it's longer than Lord of the Rings.
Not 666?
It's a slog. It's a book I've yet to read. We had Varney the Vampire, and then we have Wagner the Werewolf. Both written in like the same kind of 1840s.
Wagner the Werewolf.
Yeah, it's hard to do it without doing werewolf. Really tricky. The thing with Varney the Vampire, I will say, is quite funny if you want to read it, because it was an influence on Dracula in various ways. It's the first one specifically to mention fangs word sinking into skin. It has a thing where kind of the first sort of 500 pages is, oh, it's a vampire, and then he keeps getting shot and then appears again and escapes and appears again and escapes and appears again, trying to get hold of like one family's estate. And then kind of they shoo him away, and then a baron kind of turns up to try and marry into another local place. And the family that are originally getting tormented turn up and go, oh my God, it's Varney in a new disguise. And then
And a mustache.
Essentially, and then he kind of flees to the continent, and then you have pretty much the same thing of a stranger goes into somebody, takes up rooms, there's been attacks, oh, somebody recognizes him, he escapes, going on in shorter periods of time. So it's like, first it's like 500 pages, then it's like 150, then it's like 100, then 50, 50, 50, and then it's a bit like the Master in Doctor Who, where he just keeps surviving somehow. Like, and there's interesting things again with the Crossroads. There's a bit where he does try and essentially tries to kill himself, because he's like, I've been going around for ages. Tries to throw himself off a ship and gets rescued. It's like, oh, come on. He tries to create a vampire who's interesting, and the vampire he tries to create dies, and then eventually he leaves a thing that's like, yeah, I'm going to chuck myself into Vesuvius.
Okay.
And essentially the reason why it's so long...
That'll do it.
You're describing New Moon, it sounds like. That's basically the same.
Essentially, yeah. No, the reason why that one was so long, and we're fairly sure that Stoker lifted stuff from this for Dracula, but the reason it's so long is because James Malcolm Rymer, who's also one of the people responsible for Sweeney Todd, he was getting paid by the typeset line.
I was about to ask, was it serialized or was it printed as a singular novel?
It was a serialized story, and he got paid by the line. So he just kept writing the damn thing, and every time he thought he was going to die, he
kept printing,
faith in
kept
moonlight
printing
and
money.
resurrected himself. Yeah.
And-
It just keeps going and going and going. It's hilarious.
Viewers, I want you to know Kieran is not paid by the word. This is just the love of vampires pouring out of him.
It's almost like I'm doing a PhD on horror.
Yeah.
Right, we are going to have to call it there, because we're approaching the run time of the Eggers.
Yes.
Don't worry, we've still got another 3 hours to get to that.
We are going to need to save vampires for a couple of years so Kieran could build up more knowledge. But this is now this isn't the vampire or the Nosferatu episode. This is our definitive vampire episode at this point.
Oh no! Give me a couple of years. I'll get you the definitive vampire episode.
I learned a lot, and that's what I'm always excited for when we do something that Kieran knows lots about. Yeah,
Again, almost like this is like I'm researching this for a paper as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And how much of this knowledge are you now going to steal and put into that? Who knows? Don't answer, Kieran.
Shut up, Judge.
Because we are done, but we will be back next week with something else. Until then, where can people find Kieran and Sam talking to varying degrees?
You can find me at SSP Thinks Film on Blue Sky, on Letterboxd, and on Instagram, or sspthinksfilm.com, where I finally published my my review of Nosferatu today, funnily enough. So check that out. Over at the Film Magazine, where I previously wrote, I did a comparison of the Murnau Nosferatu and the Herzog Nosferatu. So check that out on thefilmmagazine.com as well, if you like.
So most of the last half an hour, he just read off that review. And as for me, I am K Judgmental in the various places. I have nothing new to share because I'm too busy reading through H. Rider Haggard novels very, very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. Those doorstopper vampire books will not read themselves, will they? So.
And Kieran, what is the book that you edited?
Oh, Masks is on the shelf somewhere. Please pick it up. It makes me look better. Grendel Press is the publisher.
Yes. Is there an ebook version, by the way? I
think there is. It's like $3-4. The printed version is like sort of 8 or 9.
Nice.
Pounds, dollars. I can't remember the exact conversion.
You can find me at Jacob Film Guy due to a mixture of school in which yesterday I was learning about the history of book publishing and ebooks versus printed books and all of those differences in terms of mass communication. So, I've been doing a lot of that reading, and I have chaos at my doorstep constantly, every day, including the cancellation of federal grants that affect my wife's PhD and income. So that's great. I'm feeling great over here. But eventually I will write stuff, and Saturday will get our Second Cut Substack going as we begin to expand our network. This is news to them, into the Film Magazine Light, the reincarnation.
The second cut of the film. Sorry.
Yes. But thanks for watching. And
boom. That's a bloody good joke there.
Oh, I'm glad you said it so that I remembered to say that. But yeah, we will be back, hopefully, assuming I'm still present and not deported to England, because at some point my family came over here from there. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.
That is.